The summer heat in London was unbearable. That July afternoon, when 5 college students from different countries found themselves standing outside Windsor Castle. It's Jake from Australia, Pierre from France, Sophia from Italy, Hans from Germany, and Chen from South Korea had met just 3 days earlier at their hostel and quickly bonded over their shared love of social media, content creation. Each of them had thousands of followers on various platforms, and they had spent their entire European backpacking trip trying to outdo each other with increasingly bold and attention-grabbing posts. What started as friendly competition had gradually evolved into something more reckless, with each student pushing boundaries further than the last. "This is perfect," Jake announced, pulling out his phone and checking the angle.
What?
"Look at this. Guy just standing there like a statue. My followers are going to love this." The royal guard they were focusing on was Corporal David Thompson, a decorated soldier with 8 years of military service and 2 years, specifically with the Queen's Guard. He stood perfectly still in his iconic red tunic and black bearskin hat, his rifle held at the precise angle required by centuries of military tradition. Sophia giggled as she adjusted her camera settings. "In Italy, we would never have guards who just stand there and take whatever people do to them. This is going to be so easy." Pierre nodded in agreement, already imagining the likes and shares his video would generate. "I heard they're not allowed to react no matter what happens. It's like they're not even real people." Hans was busy researching on his phone. "Look at this," he said, showing the others various videos of tourists trying to make guards laugh or break character. "Everyone does the same boring stuff. We need something original, something that will really go viral." Chen, who had been quietly observing the guard, spoke up with a slight frown. "Maybe we should be respectful. This is their job, and he looks very serious about it." The other 4 turned to look at Chen with expressions of disbelief and disappointment. They had already made their plans, pooled their creative ideas, and were excited about the content they were about to create. Chen's suggestion of respect was not what they wanted to hear. "Come on, Chen," Jake said with a dismissive wave. "It'll be such a bore. These guards are practically asking for it, standing there like mannequins. Besides, they're trained to handle tourists. We're not going to hurt anyone." The 5 students began their campaign with what they thought were harmless pranks. Jake started by making exaggerated faces just inches from Corporal Thompson's field of vision, contorting his features into ridiculous expressions while Pierre filmed from multiple angles. "Nothing yet," Jake reported, stepping back to review the footage. "This guy really is like a robot." Sophia decided to escalate their efforts. She began dancing around the guard in circles, performing elaborate ballet moves and modern dance gestures. While singing loudly in Italian, her movements became increasingly dramatic as she tried to provoke any kind of reaction. Hans joined in by attempting to start conversations with the guard, speaking in multiple languages and asking increasingly personal questions. "What's your name? Where are you from? Do you ever get tired? Can you blink? Are you even human?" Throughout all of this, Corporal Thompson maintained his professional composure. His years of training had prepared him for exactly these kinds of situations. He had dealt with drunk tourists, crying children, aggressive protesters, and attention-seeking social media creators. His ability to remain focused on his duty while ignoring distractions had been tested, proven countless times. But what the students didn't realize was that Corporal Thompson was not just enduring their behavior. He was carefully observing and assessing each of them. His military training included threat evaluation, crowd psychology, and situational awareness that went far beyond simply standing still and looking impressive. Chen remained hesitant about participating in the increasingly disrespectful display. "Guys, I think we should stop. Look at all the other tourists watching us. They don't look amused."
Oh.
Indeed, a crowd had gathered around them, but the expressions on the faces of other visitors ranged from disapproval to outright disgust. Several older tourists were shaking their heads in disapproval, and a few families with children had moved away from the area entirely. Pierre, however, was energized by the attention. "This is perfect. Look how many people are watching us. When this goes online, everyone will see how many views we're getting." Jake checked his phone and grinned. "Psst, I'm already getting comments and shares on the live stream. People love this stuff. The 4 active participants were so focused on their social media metrics that they failed to notice the subtle changes in their surroundings. Changes that Corporal Thompson was tracking with professional precision. The situation reached a turning point when Hans decided that their previous efforts weren't generating enough viral content. He approached Corporal Thompson more aggressively, getting within inches of the guard's face and shouting in German before switching to heavily accented English. "Hey, statue man, wake up. We're talking to you. Don't you have any pride? Any self-respect? How can you just stand there while we make fun of you?" Sophia joined in, emboldened by Hans's boldness. She began making loud, mocking sounds and pretending to march in military formation around the guard. Her movements deliberately clumsy and disrespectful. Jake took things even further by attempting to touch the guard's uniform, reaching toward the polished buttons on Corporal Thompson's red tunic, while Pierre captured every moment on video. "This is amazing content," Pierre laughed, zooming in on the guard's face. "He really can't do anything to stop us." What the students didn't understand was that their behavior had crossed from annoying tourist antics into territory could be considered threatening or harassing. Corporal Thompson's training included precise protocols for different levels of tourist interaction, and these protocols had specific escalation procedures. Chen, who had been growing increasingly uncomfortable, finally spoke up more forcefully. "Stop it, all of you. This isn't funny anymore. We're being horrible to this person." "He's not a person. He's a tourist attraction," Hans replied dismissively. "Look, he doesn't even react when I do this." He began making exaggerated gestures even closer to the guard's face. But Corporal Thompson was reacting, just not in ways the students could see. His peripheral vision had cataloged the positions of all 5 tourists, the locations of nearby security personnel, the exits and entrances in the immediate area, and the growing concern of other visitors. His years of military experience had taught him to recognize when a situation was about to require intervention. The subtle signs were all there: escalating behavior, increasing boldness, loss of respect for boundaries, and the pack mentality that was developing among 4 of the 5 students. The crowd around them had grown larger, but the mood was shifting. From curious observation to genuine concern, several people were now filming not because they found it entertaining, but because they sensed something unpleasant was about to happen and wanted to document it. The moment that changed everything came when Jake, frustrated by the guards' continued lack of response, decided to make physical contact. He reached out and actually touched Corporal Thompson's bearskin hat, attempting to push it slightly askew, while grinning at Pierre's camera. In that instant, Corporal Thompson's military training activated with precision and authority that shocked everyone present. Without breaking his formal posture or losing his professional demeanor, he spoke in a voice that cut through the summer air like a blade. "Step back immediately and cease this behavior." The command was delivered with such unexpected force and authority that all 4 active students froze mid-action. The voice carried years of military command experience, and it contained an undertone that made it clear this was not a request or suggestion. Jake stumbled backward, his hand dropping, away from the guard's hat as if it had suddenly become electrified. The confident smirk disappeared from his face, replaced by something closer to genuine alarm. Sir Corporal Thompson continued, his eyes now focused directly on Jake, while somehow maintaining awareness of all the other students. "You have just committed assault on a member of Her Majesty's Guard? You will remain exactly where you are." The students looked around frantically and realized that the situation had changed dramatically. Other guards had appeared from positions they hadn't even noticed, and several uniformed security personnel were approaching from different directions. Pierre's hands shook as he continued filming, but his excitement had transformed into nervous fear. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he whispered to Sophia, who was now looking pale and anxious. Hans, who had been the most aggressive in his taunting, suddenly found himself unable to speak. The guard's direct attention and the arrival of additional security made him realize they were no longer anonymous tourists having fun. They were potential subjects of legal action. Chen stepped forward, his voice trembling but determined. "Officer, sir, I want you to know that I told them to stop. I didn't participate in any of this." Try to get them to be respectful. Corporal Thompson's gaze shifted to Chen, and his expression softened slightly. I observed your behavior. Son, you conducted yourself appropriately throughout this incident. The crowd around them had grown significantly, and the mood was now one of anticipation and concern. Other tourists were whispering among themselves, and many were recording what appeared to be the aftermath of a serious breach of protocol. What happened next demonstrated exactly why Corporal Thompson had earned his position as a Queen's Guard. Instead of immediately calling for arrests or creating a scene that would traumatize the growing crowd of onlookers, he chose a different approach, one that would prove far more effective than simple punishment. You four, he said, addressing Jake, Pierre, Sophia, and Hans with the same commanding voice, will now demonstrate proper respect for this uniform, this position, and this institution. You will stand at attention and listen while I explain exactly what you have done wrong. The four students, still in shock from the dramatic change in circumstances, automatically followed his instructions. Years of school discipline and authority figures had conditioned them to respond to that tone of voice. Even in their adult lives, Corporal Thompson began speaking in a clear, carrying voice that was obviously intended for the entire crowd to hear. These individuals attempted to use my position and my duty as entertainment for their social media platforms. They believed that because I am trained to maintain discipline and focus, I was somehow less than human and deserved no respect. 8. Tried to interrupt. We didn't mean you will remain silent unless I ask you a direct question. Thompson cut him off firmly. What you meant is irrelevant. What matters is what you did and what you need to understand. He continued his impromptu lesson, explaining the significance of the Queen's Guard, the years of training required, the sacrifices made by military personnel, and the importance of respecting institutions and traditions, even when visiting foreign countries. Sophia began crying quietly, finally understanding the magnitude of their disrespectful behavior. Pia had stopped filming and was staring at the ground in shame. Hans looked as though he wanted to disappear entirely. Chen, standing slightly apart from the others, watched with a mixture of relief and sadness as his travel companions faced the consequences of their actions. Now, Corporal Thompson said, after several minutes of education, you will each apologize. It's not to me personally, but to everyone here who had to witness your behavior and to the institution you disrespected. The apologies that followed were awkward, sincere, and clearly came from students who had suddenly realized they were not the clever content creators they thought they were, but rather tourists who had embarrassed themselves and their countries in front of a crowd of strangers. After the apologies were completed, Corporal Thompson made a decision that surprised everyone present. Instead of pursuing formal charges or having the students removed from the premises, he chose to turn their mistake into a teaching moment that would benefit not just them, but everyone who witnessed it. You will now delete all the content you recorded here today, he instructed. It's not because I'm forcing you to, but because you should understand that real respect means not profiting from your own disrespectful behavior. Pierre, Sophia, and Hans looked at each other uncertainly, then slowly began deleting their photos and videos. The process was clearly painful for them, as they watched hours of planned content disappear from their devices. Furthermore, Thompson continued, you will spend the remainder of your time in London learning about British military history and the role of the Queen's Guard. I want you to understand what you were mocking before you leave this country. Chen stepped forward again. Sir, what about me? I know I didn't participate, but I was with them. Corporal Thompson looked at Chen with something approaching approval. You, young man, demonstrated moral courage by standing up to peer pressure and speaking out against behavior you knew was wrong. That's exactly the kind of character we expect from visitors to our country. Yes. As the crowd began to disperse, many people approached the four chastened students with words that ranged from disappointment to disappointment to learn from their mistakes. Several older tourists took the time to explain why the students' behavior had been so offensive, while others offered suggestions for meaningful ways to spend their remaining time in London. The 5 students walked away from Windsor Castle as very different people than they had been when they arrived. Jake, Pierre, Sophia, and Hans had learned that real consequences exist for disrespectful behavior, and that viral fame built on mocking others is not worth the cost to one's character. Chen had learned that sometimes standing alone for what's right is more important than maintaining friendships with people who make poor choices. Most importantly, everyone present that day, tourists, guards, local visitors, had witnessed an example of how discipline, professionalism, and education can be more powerful than punishment. When it comes to changing hearts and minds, Corporal Thompson returned to his post, resuming his stoic posture and unwavering attention to duty. But inside, he carried the satisfaction of knowing that he had upheld not just the security of the royal grounds, but the honor and dignity of the institution he served, while teaching 5 young people a lesson they would carry with them for the rest of their lives.